All right, welcome to the Student Athlete Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Lemke. Today we have a special guest, Clay Hammons, a renowned physical therapist who works extensively with baseball players. Clay played baseball growing up and in high school, which fueled his passion for the sport. In his PT practice, he has seen many baseball players and also coaches youth baseball, focusing on pitching and hitting mechanics. In this episode, we'll dive into overuse injuries in baseball, strategies for recovery, and more. Clay, it's an honor to have you on the show.
Nick, man, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. So let's go ahead and get right into it. So I want to start off with a little background in you, make sure the audience knows who you are, your background, and then we'll get into, a lot of the good stuff, the overuse, the recovery, all that good stuff. Does that sound good?
Absolutely. Sounds great.
Awesome. So first off, can you start by just sharing a bit about your background in baseball and then how you got into working with baseball players?
Yeah, so a little about me. So I've been a PT for 10 years now. Golly, time's flying by. 10 years now, focused mainly on the outpatient orthopedic setting. Started working with more baseball players maybe 3-4 years ago. Baseball is a huge passion of mine, played it growing up. I now have two sons that are 8 and 9 that play baseball as well. So I coach their travel baseball teams, their rec baseball teams, and also help out the local high school baseball team when they're in season and off season. I actually got a call today. I got a high school kid coming in today for me to treat. Look at. So, it never stops. So that's just a huge part of my life. Now that I have kids in it and just love to be surrounded by it, that's kind of my happy place when I'm on the baseball diamond, right? And so over the years, I just kind of started diving into more of, say, the mechanics of baseball, hitting and primarily pitching. As now I'm sure that you know, and you hear it all the time on the news, is like we're getting so many more arm injuries in baseball. It's just kind of an epidemic right now, really. Like it's just every week it's, this pitcher's out, this pitcher's out, this pitcher's out, Tommy John, shoulder, this, that, right? Just seems like it never ends. And so, I just started asking myself why, why are we seeing that? And I went from, being in the outpatient setting where I was primarily treating those injuries after they happened, right? I would get a college D1 athlete in, post-op shoulder injury or elbow injury, UCL tear, right? And I would rehab them, but then I started saying, well, what can I do to make sure that doesn't happen again to them, right? Or now that I'm in the youth baseball scene with my kids, how can I assure them and do everything that I can do for my athletes that they're not going to have that problem come up in the future? And so that's kind of why I'm doing what I'm doing now, is just prevention and stop this kind of cascade of madness that's going on with these injuries.
Yeah. I mean, and that's huge. Like I love that passion. It's similar to mine, where it's like there's this big gap of just lack of information, lack of knowledge, and it's like, hey, we've got to equip not just these adult players, but the high school players, the even the younger youth players. It sounds like, which I'm definitely going to ask you about in a bit here, but then the parents and the coaches too.
100%.
Yeah. So you have a unique perspective where you're not just a physical therapist, but you're also a baseball coach. So you're able to kind of bring in both perspectives into this. So like, how is that, having both of those roles, influence you in terms of how you treat players, player development, and injury prevention?
Yeah, I think, having that background in PT and kind of a biomechanical analysis, where every time I'm looking at a player, I'm not just seeing, how they're performing, from a perspective of, what are your stats and, this and that, but more as what are your mechanics like, right? Like, are you doing something that's going to set you up for injury later, especially on now, like the youth side of things? The earlier that we can catch those things and teach those players those things early on, the less likelihood of them developing bad habits by the time they get into high school. And then it's just really hard to kind of recover from that, really. So, if I can catch it now with my 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, then, as long as they can implement those things that we teach and drive into them, then they're going to have a lot less likelihood of having an injury and then ensuring that if they want to prolong their career, that they can do so and do so in a healthy manner.
Yeah. No, that's key. And I know, like, again, we're gonna get into quickly here is like, I know some of the athletes I know here in Washington State where, one of the pitchers who's pitching 95 miles an hour in their sophomore junior year of high school, like, that is just insane. And so yeah, I definitely want to get to that.
Yeah.
But can you actually share more about like some common overuse injuries? You mentioned Tommy John, but what are some other ones you tend to see, particularly with like pitchers?
Yeah, so with the pitchers, typically, we'll see some type of medial elbow pain, right? Whether that be in the youth athlete, little leaguer's elbow, right? They call it, right, which is just kind of inflammation of this part of the elbow right here, where this tendon comes in and inserts into the bone there. And then the other big one that I see is just shoulder impingement, right? Which is just, if you've got your scapula here, you've got socket, ball comes in when we're raising our arm overhead. If we don't have good scapulohumeral rhythm, which is where our shoulder blade is working for us as we're raising our arm, we will jam that up, right? And if you're doing a repetitive motion over and over and over again, that's going to lead to tendinopathies of the shoulder, rotator cuff, bicep tendinopathies, that sort of thing, just inflammation. That's going to make it really painful to throw, where you kind of have to stop, right? And then that's when you get sent to the doctor and then the PT, and then you have to stop playing for weeks at a time to rehab it back, right? So my big thing is, let's make sure the athlete is well equipped before we start playing, right? Are you even ready to throw? Do you know you're ready to throw, right? Do you have a good arc of motion, 180 degrees of external plus internal rotation at the arm? Is your scapulohumeral rhythm good enough, right? Can you hold your shoulder blade back and scap load as we raise our arm, or does it look more like this, right? If it looks more like that, then you're going to have, the shoulder issues come up, right? Which then can develop into elbow issues as well, right?
Yeah.
So those are probably the two biggest one, right? Like medial elbow pain, okay, and then shoulder pain, usually anterior shoulder pain, right?
Okay.
Which I like to lump into just like shoulder impingement, right? Which is essentially just tendinopathy of the rotator cuff or biceps tendon.
Okay.
Yep.
And how would athletes know, like what symptoms would they notice with those issues, whether it be the elbow or the impingement there?
Yeah, sharp pain, right? That kind of lingers and lasts, especially when you throw or after you throw. Tenderness to palpation, right? Just it's going to be sore to touch, in some areas right around those tendon insertions, right? You may even notice some redness, inflammation around there. Those are some key signs that, hey, something's wrong, right? Like, it's normal. Like, if I have a pitcher that goes out and throws, right? Like, so let's say my kid goes and throws, like, it's normal to have like dull, achy pain for a day or two after you throw. That's just normal. You're going to get that. But if you start getting a sharp pain that, hey, this is a little different, right? And then it starts lingering on, then, you need to see somebody sooner rather than later to address that issue.
Okay. By the way, for those listening on just to the audio, I definitely recommend you going back and listening to the video, because I know, or going on YouTube and watching the video piece, because there's with the physical therapy piece, there's definitely going to be a lot of motions and movements and stuff. So it really helps, to have that visual, especially for these parts of it. So just for the listener, making sure that you guys come back and check out the video when you get a chance. So on those overuse injuries with the elbow and the shoulder, how does this, the increasing speeds, like, again, these teen athletes, these high schoolers who are pitching 90-95 miles an hour, like, how does that have a role in that? And, what are some potential risks of being able to, pitch that fast, and especially for like whole games? Like, I watched a kid that was pitching that for a whole 9 inning or a whole 7 innings. So what's your take on that?
I mean, that's definitely the hot topic right now in baseball is velo, right? Like, everybody's after velo, all right? And so, but when should we be talking about that, right? Like, I saw something the other day on Instagram where I forget who it was. I wish I would have pinned it, but they were talking about how they were so happy that they got their 12-year-olds that they're training to pitch, they're up in the 80s, right, or something. And I was like, that's insane. Like, and just watching them pitch, they showed 3 video clips, and on all 3 shots or clips, all 3 kids' hats fell off because they're trying to put everything they have into it, right? And so it's like, man, their bodies aren't developed, right? Their growth plates are wide open, and you're trying to put maximal strain through the arm, and they're not even focused on the mechanical side of things. They're just saying, hey, how hard can I throw the ball, right? How hard can I stress my arm? How hard can I stress my body at an early age? Like, you're not going to get drafted at 12 years old.
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to get drafted at 13, 14, 15, 16, right? It's nice to be able to say you throw that hard, but are you setting yourself up for injury? And I typically don't like to even talk velo until we've reached a maturity level where our bodies have grown to almost maximal capacity, right? And then we're strengthened enough to where our bodies can withstand that, right? And so it's better to teach mechanics, control, right, and just focus on, before we can throw hard, we have to have sound mechanics first, right? And our bodies have to be developed enough first in order to withstand the loads that we're going to place upon it. And so, yeah, that's definitely a huge thing. Everybody's about velo now, and velo's great, but at what point in the development process? And for me, the later the better, right? I mean, if you do things biomechanically sound, then your velo is going to go up naturally, right? Because we're using less of our arm and more of our body, right? We're using our backside of our leg more. We're going to be using our body more to rotate through the ball, and then our arm comes at the end, boom, down, right? And so the arm, I always teach it that it's kind of like a train, like so especially young players, they think, and this is why we get a lot of elbow pain, is like they think it's all arm, right? And so they're standing upright and they're throwing and they're whipping, and the arm should be the caboose, not the engine, right? So the engine is backside of the leg, pelvis, spine, right? And then the arm comes through last. And so if you do that sequence properly, then yeah, you're going to naturally get more velo, and you're going to get more velo without injuring your arm. But if you're just trying to just say, hey, just throw as hard as you can, and you don't have sound mechanics, it's not a question of if you're going to have an arm injury, it's when you're going to have an arm injury.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for those who are already pitching that high, like, what do you recommend if they've already been hitting, like, so again, like a 16, 17-year-old who's already hitting 90, 95 miles an hour, like, how do you handle that and mitigate like the risks of that?
Yeah, I would say they need to be on some sort of really good arm care routine, as far as like, day one after you throw, everybody should be doing some sort of arm care, soft tissue work after, right? Body flush, like go out for a run, get it in. Next day, we're going to do some band work, right? Some strengthening work, right? And just really sit back and let your body recover, right? And then getting into some more, like I said, instead of just going out and throwing, like working on your legs, working on your spine mobility, things like that, so that we can make sure that your arm can withstand it. Because it's really not about the arm as much as it is more about the body, right? Yeah. Legs, spine, mobility, making sure you have the range of motion, making sure after you throw, we're getting those trigger points out of the arm. Like I said, that's kind of where it needs to be. But as far as, so if you have that athlete that is throwing that hard, just make sure that you are strong enough, you have a good scapulohumeral rhythm, and that you're using your body well and not just throwing more with your arm. So it just kind of all goes back to mechanically how we're doing things, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think if you're throwing really hard, great, but are you doing it well, or are you using more arm than you are your body?
Okay. You mentioned that scapular piece. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah. So scapulohumeral rhythm, we want the shoulder blade to to be doing more work for us as we're raising our arm, right? And so if you tend to raise your arm first and you start to see that shoulder blade raise up before your arm goes up, that's not a good thing, right? So we want that shoulder blade to be set back, right? So when we throw, we want scap load, be able to keep it there as we're raising our arm. That's just going to create more space here, right? We want to keep this space without jamming up those structures that are in between the acromion and the humeral head. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about scapulohumeral rhythm, right? We want this, right? And that, as opposed to as I raise my arm, that goes up too. So that's going to lead to jamming here, right? And then you're going to start getting the rotator cuff tendinopathies, long head of the bicep tendinopathies that are consistent with shoulder impingement.
And would you say that's more like mobility focused, or are you like even like strength training? Like I just think about strength training and how a lot of guys overemphasize bench press and push up and all the things versus like back work.
Yeah, I think it's more of a stability thing, right? And so yeah, like you said, you have guys that focus on bench or whatever it may be. That's fine, but we need to have very good awareness of where our shoulder blade is at all times. Okay. And so it's all about that scap load here. Like I want to be really strong here. I want to be stable closer to my spine or body so that I can have good mobility away from my body. Right. And so as long as we're good and stable here, we've got a good scap load, and that's fine where my arm goes. Right. But if I do something that looks like this, that's going to cause some issues.
Really throw up that arm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're going to run into, like I said, it's not a matter of if you're going to have a shoulder issue, but when.
Okay. What about the whole idea of like pitching all year, especially with the number of leagues? There's fall ball, there's, travel season, there's spring, there's always like something going. So what's your thoughts on, the taking breaks throughout the year and whatnot?
Yeah, and so for me, I think that's part of the reason why we're kind of in this situation we are in our game where we're having more arm injuries is, I'm 40 years old. So when I was coming up, we didn't have all this travel ball where we, early specialization in baseball and we played baseball all year round. No, we played baseball, then we played football, then we played basketball, or we played, we just kept playing a different sport, which is good because we're using our muscles differently. But now it's like, hey, I want, you got kids specializing and they're just playing baseball all year round at 8, 9, 10 years old. Right. And it just never stops. Like the overhead motion never stops. Right. And so, yeah, you need to take breaks. And I don't think that you need to have early specialization. And if you do, then you don't need to play, spring, summer, fall, winter. Right. Pick one. Right. And then have, either the fall or the winter off to train effectively so that you can then go back out the next spring and summer. So if you are going to early specialize, I would highly recommend not playing year round and work on more development in your off season. Right. So developing your mechanics, developing your strength, developing your mobility. Right. Still working on your skills, but you're not out playing 5 games a weekend all year round.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't equate to a healthy arm.
Yeah. When we even get into like the overuse piece with that, where, like on my side of things, a lot of athletes come to me wanting to gain weight. Like that's one of the main reasons athletes want to come to me is they want to get bigger, stronger. And a lot of it's like mass is gas, there's all these different things about getting, for reasons to get bigger. But the problem is they're going at such a high level all year round that it's like you have no room to really build muscle because you're just constantly going. Right. So it's like, yeah, that's why, I always stress with my athletes, hey, if you can take that break, like you said, like winter, some of them in the fall, maybe a combination of, but yeah, for sure.
Yep.
What about, you mentioned a little bit about like that need for recovery post game, and then even like for like more intense practice sessions. What are some strategies for recovery for you? You mentioned a couple, but what sticks out to you the most for pitchers?
Yeah, like I said, I think day one, you need to go get some type of arm care the next day, right? You need to see somebody, or maybe do it yourself with a massage gun, or whatever. But you need to have some type of soft tissue work, right? I'm not really big on icing anymore. I think that's kind of becoming a thing of the past. Whereas the body, as we throw a lot, right, you're going to have little micro tearing and things like that. It's going to create some inflammation, but that's how we heal, right? I mean, that's how the body heals itself. So if you're going in and you're getting done and you're taking a bunch of NSAIDs, and then, icing for 3 days, like that's just taking your body's natural healing capabilities away from it, right? So I would rather more go get your arm care, go for a run, a jog, right? Go run a mile, flush out all that bad stuff, right? And then start working on arm care, start doing band routine, right? Day two, go out, throw some just light catch, right? Just light catch, focusing on mechanics, right? Where we need to be, right? And then progressing to heavier lifts the next day, right? Bullpen, ready for your start.
Yeah.
So,
On the recovery piece, is there anything else, like, even outside of the movement piece that you feel needs to be emphasized to help that recovery process?
as far as the movement piece, what
Like
do we need?
beyond like physical therapy, or beyond like the movement and the running and whatnot, is there other things that you're like, hey, like athletes really need to be prioritizing these things?
I mean, I definitely just think flexibility too, especially of your spine. We need to make sure that we're getting into extension so that we can rotate well. So I love doing spinal mobility work, hip mobility work, arm mobility. Like I said, somebody needs to be checking to make sure that you have 180 degrees of rotation from external to internal at all times. And if we don't, then we need to figure out why. Okay. And then, it could be a little trigger point, right? Or something that we can go in and needle or do some soft tissue work on and free it up, and then get you that mobility back. So my big thing is just mobility and stability. Those are my big things. Like, we want to be able to move in a good range of motion, but we want to be strong in that motion as well, right?
Yeah.
So that's really my big pieces on it. As far as what should we be doing? Yeah, there's certain ranges of motion that we want to achieve with the arm, and with the spine as well, right? And so those are the two biggest parts on mobility that I think we need to pay attention to for the overhead athlete, is arm rotation, right, and spinal mobility, especially into extension and rotation.
Yeah. Okay. And then what about, like, so I mentioned that phrase. Have you heard that I'm sure you've heard the masses gas
Yeah,
phrase.
right.
What's your take on that one?
And so, yeah, that's funny. So before spring training this year, I was working with a pitcher with the Braves organization. I think he's now in AA. He used to be with the Phillies, and so when he was with the Phillies organization, he said he really tried to bulk up, right, gain mass, right, and he noticed he actually wasn't throwing as hard, and so his velo went down, right, and so he thought that since he was doing all this heavy lifting and gaining mass, that he was probably losing some mobility, and then stopped training so heavy, started focusing on mobility more, still lifting, but just not lifting for hypertrophy as much, right? And then started noticing his velo go back up.
All right.
And so he was just kind of, and that's from professional athlete, right?
Yeah.
And so that was his experience with it. I mean, yeah, we want to lift, certain muscle groups heavy, but I don't think that gaining more muscle mass equates to throwing harder. You know what I mean? I mean, you can look at some of the pitchers in the league, and they're, skinny as a rail, and they're throwing 98, 99 miles an hour or whatever. I mean, I think it's better to be stronger. Like if you are going to lift for hypertrophy, I mean, I would go legs. Right? I mean, I want a really solid foundation down here. But if you're
Mhm.
lifting for hypertrophy here, right, then that can equate to a problem with your mobility.
Yeah.
And so if you are lifting for hypertrophy there, just make sure that you're keeping your 180 degrees of rotation and you're keeping your spine mobile, right?
Yeah.
And so, if you are getting really big and, bulking up, make sure that you're also staying mobile. So, but that was his, I guess, experience with trying to lift heavy and gain muscle mass. Maybe like you said, too, more mass is gas, right? And that was just the exact opposite for him, right?
Yeah.
So he had to back off, work on mobility, and then his velo went back up to mid 90s, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think that's always true.
Yeah, or at least to like a degree where it's like, it's, I mean, I guess if we give an example of, say, a 6'2", we'll just give an example, 6'2" pitcher who's 150 goes to 180 versus one that's already at 180 and goes up to like 210, 220. It's like, well, there's
Right.
only so much. I mean, even with like running or with like a football running back, like there's a sweet spot where if you go too high, you're gonna lose speed and kind of revert back.
Right. And that's my thing. Great. Yeah, you're getting stronger, you're getting bigger, right? But is your mobility staying where it needs to be, or are you decreasing in mobility, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like, you see all these big buff guys in the gym, they're lifting all the time, and it's like you get them to bend down to tie their shoe, they can't hardly do it, right? So that can kind of adversely affect your mobility. But if you're working on your mobility through it at the same time and you're able to keep that, then great. You shouldn't have a problem. But definitely need to emphasize the mobility side of it if you are going to try to bulk up. So
Yeah,
that
no,
would
that's good.
that'll be my take on it. Yeah, I mean, get stronger, but stay mobile.
Mhm.
For sure. Let's switch a little bit because I know pitching is your sweet spot, but I wanna dig into the position players because I feel like this is one that I know, like, you and Kevin McGovern, you guys are big on the pitching aspect, but I'm curious on the position player piece. Like, is there anything else that you see either similarly or something else that you may see overuse wise for them, especially with their training and playing schedules?
Yeah, I mean, they're throwing too, right? I mean, they're throwing all the time too. And so, especially in the youth game, is you have kids that are not just specialized in pitching. Yeah, they pitch, right? And so that's kind of part of the load management, especially with youth pitchers, is you may have a kid that goes out and starts a game, and then, where do they go after that? What position are they playing after that? How many more throws are they making from third base over to first or short over to first on strong velo throws, or maybe they play catcher and they're throwing down to second a lot, right? And you know, and so that's when you got to think, yeah, you got your pitch count, right? But then how many more high velo throws are you making on other positions, right? And so, especially in the youth game. And so I think that, we do, well, some people do a really good job of managing pitch counts and some people don't.
Yeah.
But I don't think that a lot of people also do a good job of managing how many throws that their players are making at other positions as well. And so I think we need to take that into consideration in terms of the load management, right? Like, I don't like to have, because my kid play pitcher and catcher and they play third base. Like, I don't like to, in a perfect world, I don't like to have them go straight from pitcher to catcher because that's a lot of throws back to the pitcher.
Yeah.
And if somebody's stealing, they're hosing it down to second base all the time, right? And that's just, you can just go ahead and add those throws onto their pitch count,
Yeah.
right? And so, but as far as mechanically speaking and what we want to be teaching, it's somewhat similar in terms of the scapulohumeral rhythm, making sure that you have the mobility to throw, making sure that you have the strength to throw there with the scapulohumeral rhythm, right? Things are in place. There's not much different there. And then making sure you're incorporating your lower half as well, right? And we're not just throwing with our arm, but we are using our legs and our bodies to turn, and then our arm comes last, right? So in terms of, what's different mechanically, not a lot, to be honest with you. It's just more of the load management, right? Especially if you have an athlete that is pitching and playing shortstop or pitching and playing catcher, right? How many throws are they doing at those other positions as well? And that's the biggest thing I see. So
Okay. So you mentioned those shoulders. Another one that I'm curious about, because I feel like I hear this one enough, is the low back and like core in general. So like when we
mhm.
talk about like low back strains or any sort of like low back, like even if they're like minor injuries, what's your experience with that? And yeah.
Yeah, so low back, I see a lot of times, and then man, that's a loaded question. The low back. So yes, you have low back pain, right? But then also, a lot of stuff that kind of happens in the lower extremities that may not present like low back really is low back. And so, for me, anytime I have an athlete that has a lower extremity problem injury, I always like to screen the low back first. That's always my go-to. So what's your mobility there? So I'll kind of just do a whole exam. Say you have knee pain, right? Well, how's your low back? Yeah, sometimes I get low back pain too. Okay. All right, let's do a knee exam. Oh, your knee exam's negative, right? Maybe you're a little weak there, but there's pretty much unremarkable. But let's go do your back exam. And I would say 9 times out of 10, they're lacking some sort of extension, right?
Mhm.
We tend to operate in flexion in everyday life, right? So we're sitting, right? We're bending over. We don't tend to operate back here in this space a lot, right?
Well, especially like, I mean, this goes back to the shoulders too, is the backpacks.
Right.
Like a lot of these kids are carrying, 20-pound, 30-pound backpacks on top of everything. So yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I say about the spine. You get this kind of rounded shoulders, kyphotic position, and then we're always here, right? And then, we're going and lifting heavy in the gym, squats, whatever. How's your form with that, right? I mean, that's one of the biggest functional movements that you should be able to do is squat correctly, right? And so, how's that squat? And that's what I see a lot with the younger group, especially here now, is that they're going to lift maybe for football. Maybe it's an athlete that's a dual sport athlete, and they're playing baseball and football. And so, the football lifting kind of overlaps with the baseball a little bit, and they're coming in with these back strains, these disc strains from lifting so much and lifting the wrong way, right? And then so we've got to go address that back issue as well. So that is a big one. You are right, but I would also pour into if you have a leg injury, if you're noticing that's weaker in your leg, or that if maybe your sprint times are going down, you're not able to run as fast, and you should not just focus on where you're getting your pain, whether it's at your knee or your hip or your calf or your ankle. Check out the low back. Always screen the low back, right? And you'll typically find you'll start asking them, well, do you ever get low back pain? Yeah, it comes and goes, right? Well, now it's just gotten to the point that it's affecting your leg as well, right, through the nervous system. So fix the problem, not just the symptoms, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Always address that.
Okay. So we talked about recovery stuff for the shoulders. What would be some recovery stuff or, corrective? And I know there's so many different things that, are involved there, but, what are some, I guess, common ones, or what are some things that may be a course correction for the low back and the leg, whether it be strength or recovery?
Yeah, so I think it's all about mobility of the spine. Like I said, we tend to get focused here. Everything's out in front of us, right? So it's flexion, 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 flexion all day, right? So need to be getting back into extension to kind of counterbalance that, right? It all kind of goes back to that Robin McKenzie principle. I don't know if you ever heard the McKenzie method of treatment, but really just focusing on doing a functional movement screen on your movement. Where are you stiff at? Where's the restriction at? I mean, like I said, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be an extension, right? And so just because we function the opposite way so much of our day, right? And so I think just incorporating some form of extension, whether that just be like prone press ups there or like a cobra type move, right? Where we're getting back an extension. But just, you can do a self assessment. Just Bend down, touch your toes. How does that feel? Does that hurt? No. Bend back. Man, that feels stiff. Like, okay, well then go do that repetitively, right? I always say 10 reps, maybe 3 to 4 times a day, just working an extension, right? And then doing some sort of rotation as well, right? Because we need extension to rotate as well. And so that's probably my biggest one, and what I give everybody to do, because typically somebody doesn't need more flexion because we're always there, but we need more extension because we're not getting there. And so, if you have a young athlete with low back pain, simply just doing a functional movement screen of flexion and extension to see where they're limited. Typically, it's going to be the extension. Just do more extension biased exercise.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
Yep.
So you're really big. Like, I love that, like, the mobility piece, because again, everybody so much emphasizes the strength side of things, and again, I often see those imbalances with it. So I love, like, again, the mobility. I think, like, I mean, would you say yoga, tai chi, all those types of things could be beneficial in this space as well?
I think yoga's great. Tai chi, great. Especially great for pitchers. I mean, tai chi, you got to balance, right? And so that's a problem, especially with a lot of youth pitchers, is they're not able to balance well long enough on their back leg, right, to be stable. And then you've got to go from your back leg to your front leg to balance to be stable while your back leg's up, right? And so you're just doing a balancing act the whole time. So I think incorporating that, both of those disciplines can be great for a young athlete.
Yeah, awesome. So then on the strength side of things, like, again, I know the mobility is a huge emphasis here. What are some common imbalances you see on the strength side of things, for both like pitcher and position players?
Yeah, I think that, we do a good job of, everybody wants to get in the gym and, hit the pecs, right? We want to get our pecs. We want to get our biceps working well, right? All that stuff, right? But we don't do a good job on the back side of our shoulder. So the posterior rotator cuff. And that's where I like to focus a lot of, right? This tends to get really strong, right? Tight, right? And this tends to stay a little weaker, right? And so focusing on being able to stabilize that shoulder, strong external rotation, but strong as it's lengthening when the arm has to decelerate. Okay. And so we really want to focus on deceleration of your external rotators, okay? Especially the infraspinatus back here on the shoulder. Like I can't speed up what I can't slow down, right? And so it's kind of like a car, right? If I got a brick wall 100 yards in front of me and I take off as fast as I can and I try to stop, 10 feet in front of that brick wall, I better have some pretty good brakes or I'm going to go crash. And so making sure that you have a good braking system on the backside of the shoulder as you're coming through, right, is key. So I would say that would be the big imbalance that I see in terms of overhead athletes, is being really strong here, right, and really tight here. This back here gets a little weak, especially on the eccentric side of things as our muscles contracting, but it's lengthening, right? And so that's what I try to train a lot on my overhead athletes.
Okay. So what would be an example of an exercise that can help with that deceleration or that slowing down, essentially, on the overhead? Like what would just be, like, even just one exercise?
Yeah, so like one exercise, I mean, you can get kind of prone laying down on a table, right? Lifting up here, right? And then just slowly let it rotate down, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or if you got a band, right? And you're here, and then we go into external rotation. I want it to slowly lower down. If I've got a band here and I'm coming back in the external, I want it to slow. I think one of my favorites, though, kind of incorporates a little small med ball. And so you get the athlete on their, say if they're right-handed, they would be down on their right knee with their left leg out in front of them. And then somebody else will be behind them, and they're going to throw the ball over the shoulder, and they're going to have to reach out and catch that small weighted ball, start really small, right? And then decel it coming down, right? And then toss it back to them, throw over, catch decel coming down into rotation.
Okay.
Right. Those are some good ways to train those posterior rotator cuff muscles to decelerate the arm so that we don't crash into the wall.
Yeah, so again, those watching or those listening to audio, go back and check out the video, because that'll very much, those movements will help a lot, for just as some examples to get you guys started for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you can just Google, deceleration drills for overhead athletes, and I'm sure it'll pop up a lot of different stuff on there, right? But that's mainly the imbalance that I like to see and what I like to do to train that. Because like I said, you can't speed up what you can't slow down.
Yeah. So as we get into, I want to get into a little bit, even just from some of your professional experience, because number one, I know we sat down and we had lunch when we were in Florida together, and I got to hear some cool stories, but also just your experience and your opinion on certain things. And so, number one, you mentioned earlier about the playing baseball year round versus, back in the day where it's like, okay, baseball, football, basketball, like, what's your take on that, and what would you recommend for somebody who primarily wants to play baseball long term?
Yeah, I think, like I said earlier, if you just want to focus on baseball, great, right? But do so in a manner where you're not just, playing travel ball tournaments year round, right? If you want to have a season of, whether it's spring through the summer you play, right? And you take the fall and winter off sorry, my dog's coming in here, just to work on the mechanical aspects of things, right? Work with a good coach, right? That's going to emphasize mechanics over just velo, right? Mm-hmm. And train your body, train your mobility, get your strength where it needs to be, right? Making sure that you're staying mobile. Yeah, but then, staying on a throwing program during that time, but just not going out and throwing max all year round. Like I said, these travel ball teams, they'll play every weekend, 5 games a weekend, whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. Don't do that. Take some time off to take care of your body, right? Make sure you're eating right? Make sure you're staying hydrated, right? Take care of your body, stay mobile, strengthen as best you can, but do so in the right way, right? Still throw, right? Still go do your, if you're a pitcher, still go throw your bullpens, but just space them out more, right? And just focus more on the mechanical aspect of things, getting better, as opposed to playing more games. Like, playing more games isn't going to get you better all through the year. You have to focus more on development of you, as opposed to just playing in a team environment all year long, right?
Yeah.
If you want to get better, you've got to focus on you and getting you better, right? Which is having time off for your body to recover, training it appropriately, and then, hey, when it comes, time to roll around in January to get ready for spring, I'm there and I'm going to be better, right? You'll probably be throwing harder, right? And have less pain doing it.
Yeah. So when we talk about the overuse piece, you mentioned the dual sport or the dual position athletes. I've got to hear, because we're recording this in 2024 post Shohei Ohtani's injury last year. Like, what's your opinion on his journey to that injury, and like, what do you feel like may have contributed to that, and what can players learn from it?
Yeah, so I don't know a lot about, because I know this is now his second one. And so I don't know a lot about his career before he got to the States and just kind of where he was. And I know he had it before, but looking at him pitch, I mean, he's a freak, and just watching him mechanically, like, everything was pretty good, but I mean, he throws gas, he throws hard, I mean, he's up there touching 99, 100 miles an hour, And so it's kind of one of those things that just, sometimes injuries happen, even if you're trained really, really well. Sometimes the stresses that we place on our bodies over time our body's going to wear out a little bit, so I don't know if he was, essentially doing anything wrong, right? It's just sometimes injuries are going to happen to people.
Yeah.
And, for him, it happened twice. Now, I don't know, earlier on, was he doing something different mechanically than he's doing now? I don't, I don't know. Could be, right? But I mean, he's one of the best in the world, or if not the best in the world or ever. I guess there's an argument for that. But me watching his mechanics, man, it was really good. He used his lower half really well. He had good rotation. He just got injured. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see kind of how he bounces back. I've heard his rehab's going really well, and obviously he's hitting really well. He's
Yeah.
crushing it over in LA. I think he'll make a good comeback, and I think he'll be fine.
Okay. What about, so this is something actually one of my baseball clients was asking me to ask you about is, we have a lot of technology nowadays too with this. So, there's a lot of the electrical muscle stimulators like the Mark Pro, and then the parent that was asking, he was like, yeah, there's different versions of this when I was younger. But what's your take on those types of things for that, recovery and whatnot?
Yeah, I don't know a lot about the Mark Pro. I know it's out there. I know at the event that we were at, they had the newbie,
Yeah.
right? Kind of like muscular activation, direct current to the muscle. That makes a lot of sense to get muscles firing if you're having trouble getting them firing. But I wouldn't get so caught up in that if you don't really have to. I would say just focus on the arm care, making sure that you're getting the trigger points out of the arm after you throw, right? Making sure that you're staying good and mobile, and making sure that you're strong, right? But as far as like doing that after, yeah, I mean, yeah, you can do stem after, which I think the Mark Pro is just kind of like I don't want to misspeak on it, but is it kind of just like a TENS unit essentially? I'm not really sure on that product, but yeah, I don't know a lot about those devices. I don't typically use them a lot. I'm a big dry needler, and
Mhm.
so if I've got a muscle or an athlete that has an issue, either they're seeing decreased velo or they're having pain throwing or restriction throwing, then I'll go check for a muscular trigger point. Typically go in and dry needle that muscular trigger point, and I may connect some current to it to kind of get it stimulated a little bit, which is the
Okay.
same thing. So that's kind of my go-to for those issues, when my athletes are seeing me. But for at-home use, I could see where something like maybe the Mark Pro would kind of come in effect there if you don't have a provider that you can go see,
Mhm.
where that can be pretty beneficial to get the muscles firing a little bit better after. But that's generally what I like to do with it is
Yeah.
go in. I use a lot of dry needling, which is similar to acupuncture, just a different philosophy on it, where we're going into the muscle, we're getting that trigger point to relax, which is going to allow the muscle to operate more optimally, improve range of motion, and improve motor output from that said muscle that we're going to work on.
Okay. So that requires a lot more like hands-on essentially. So you do a lot more like local stuff. But for those in the audience who maybe don't have as much access to, I mean, just physical therapists or even just physical therapists who understand a baseball player, because I feel like, there's, just like in nutrition, that, if you go to a hospital to get advice about, sports nutrition, you're not going to get good answers. So how do you handle that for somebody who's maybe in a smaller town or just in an area where they may not have access to like a physical therapist?
Yeah, I would say, massage guns are great, right? So some muscles that I really like to focus on for baseball players after they throw are this kind of medial side of the elbow, your forearm right here, your pronator. Those are muscles that I like to do some soft tissue work on after, as well as the other side of that, right? So your wrist extensors, I like to work on that soft tissue wise. So you can take a massage gun to that as well. And then really, to me is the back side of the shoulder. Okay. So your infraspinatus, which sits on the back side of that shoulder blade, is always a trouble spot, right? So that's always one of my ones that I want to go do some soft tissue work on after to make sure that we're keeping those trigger points down, flushed out, so that we can have good mobility and so that our muscles can function the way that they need to. So those are some ones that I like to just really emphasize on after we throw, that we're going to do some soft tissue work on after.
Okay. What about for like exercise wise, or you talked about screens that, physical therapists do? Cause like a lot of the kids that I know, they've never even like seen a physical therapist before. So, what's something that could be, or what are some things that could be done even online where like, hey, if they reach out to you, what are some things that, that could be provided, virtually, to make sure that, yeah.
I think that, the biggest thing is, what does your squat look like, right? I mean, that's a big, just simple functional movement screen that we can do, that we can gather a lot of information from on just how your body's working, right? So sending me a video of your squat, sending me a video of you throwing, if you're a pitcher, what does it look like, right? Take a little slow-mo video, send it over. We'll, do an analysis of it, right? And see how it's doing. How is your range of motion, right? Like I said, we want to have that 180 arc, right? And so that was a big thing that I did here this year up at the local high school. Was we did just simple range of motions assessments of all the players prior to the season. And so we found some glaring issues that were there just on a simple arm range of motion assessment, right? That we could say, hey, I need you to do X, Y, and Z, right? Giving them a couple things to do and them going and implementing that. And then we didn't have any significant arm injuries with any player throughout the entire season. So those are things that we can do. I can get you to say, hey, this is how you check your range of motion, right? So we want that 180 arc. We want to look at your mechanics of how you throw. We want to look at how you squat. I want to see how your balance is. Those are the big things that I'm trying to look at to see, are you ready to throw?
Yeah. So I've got to ask then, so since they're, again, you kind of shared there's some things that we can do online. What's the easiest way for listeners to follow you and even, connect with you?
So I'm in the process of getting all my socials set up for my new business, right? So so right now you can follow me on Instagram at Clay Hammons, ClayHamm. But pretty soon I'm going to have new socials up and running, and we're going to be creating content that you can kind of follow along. So you can start following that account. That account will change here pretty soon. And we're going to start doing a lot of content creation to where we can provide a lot of value for free to the athlete, right? And then if you need a little more, DM me and we can go from there.
Yeah. And then can they connect with you on Facebook as well if I drop that link in the
That's just Clay Hammons. Yep, my name, ClayHammons.
Awesome, because I know a lot of the parents are on there, so we'll get you guys connected.
Yeah. So if you need anything, or just if you have any questions, I mean, I'm just always here to answer. My big thing is I would love to educate the athlete and parents on proper ways to do things for their athletes so that they can avoid injury and play the game or sport that they love for longer without getting hurt.
Yeah. No, that's good. And like I said, I will drop those in the show notes in the description. So for those listening or watching, check out the description for that. Clay, any last pieces of advice you want to leave for the younger players for, really just maintaining that performance and that recovery?
I think, the main key takeaways are making sure that you have the necessary range of motion and the necessary strength to play the game that you want to play. Okay. First and foremost, especially if you're younger, do not focus on velocity. Okay. Wait, the velo will come, right? But we have to make sure that our bodies are in a good position to get that velo, right? So if you're a pitcher, don't try to throw as hard as you can. Focus on the mechanics and location of your spots early on, right? And then you'll get into that velo a little later on, okay? And then take time for yourself to rest and recover, right? Eat well, stay hydrated, rest, recover, develop in a different way than just playing games all year round. So focus on yourself, not just you on your team. But if you want to be better, then you have to focus on yourself, making sure that you're staying in good shape, staying mobile, getting stronger through the years, but not putting a lot of wear and tear on that arm.
Yeah, no, that's good. So again, just really stressing that take care of your guys' bodies, because otherwise you're not going to be able to enjoy it as long as you want to. I mean, a lot of athletes I talk to, they want to go pro, they want to play baseball as long as they can, but you can't do that if you're not taking care of the arms, taking care of the body as a whole. So
Exactly.
y'all gotta listen.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. But so Clay, thanks again for joining us today and really sharing just all this valuable information with us. And when it comes to the preventing and really managing those overuse injuries, listeners, again, be sure to share this with your pitcher friends or parents of pitchers, or really just any of those baseball players or those who are doing a lot of those overhead movements. And remember, just really take care of your guys' bodies, stay consistent in your training and your recovery. And until next time, this is Nick Lemke, and this has been the Student Athlete Performance Podcast. Thanks.
Thanks, Nick.